Let me think.
It's stuck. Baggins is stuck.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until...
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. It's easy to get stuck in the Madeleine McCann case. There are so many different versions of events, contradictory statements, grey areas. Generally, there are roughly 4 theories regarding time of death. In order of popularity, and this is just my opinion, number 1, Madeleine overdosed while her parents were at the Tupper Spa sometime after 9 p.m. Put up your hand if this is your theory. I think there are obvious reasons why this is wrong. Number 2, Madeleine died several days earlier. Number 3, Madeleine is still alive. Number 4, Madeleine died earlier in the day. So how does one begin to find one's way through the confusing maelstrom? How do we begin to unravel this jigsaw? Where do we begin? Well, what does Bilbo Baggins say about the riddle?
Time. The answer is time.
Indeed it is. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I'll be doing the long anticipated statement analysis of the Chris Watts sermon on the porch. I'll be doing that later today, so if you're interested in the Chris Watts case, look out for that. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So where do we begin? Well, neither with how, nor with where, or even with who. We start with when. In the case of a cover-up, the easiest way to get to the when is to look at when, and this is the exact moment, not the day or the afternoon, but try and bring it down to the hour when the contradictions start. Any idea when that is in this case? Put up your hands if you think it's somewhere after 9 o'clock at night. Well, that is where most people's thinking sort of pools and coagulates, and that is where your thinking needs to depart from. Let's briefly examine those 4 principal theories again and what's wrong with them. Number 1, Madeleine overdosed while her parents were at the Tupper Spa sometime after 9 p.m. Well, if Madeleine overdosed, there would be no blood traces either in the apartment or anywhere else. Also, if she overdosed and then was removed within an hour of her death, then there wouldn't be time for cadaver odor to occur, to form. Although I think sedation does play a role in this case, it's not as direct, I feel, as many people imagine. Number 2, Madeleine died several days earlier. Well, this is a popular but far-fetched conspiracy theory. It's not one that the lead detective supports, and nor do I. Number 3, Madeleine is still alive. Now, this is another popular theory pushed for the past almost 17 years by the McCanns themselves, based on no evidence. Although it may seem normal to assume if someone disappears for a long time that they're still alive, but many law systems around the world assume if someone disappears for 7 years or longer with no sign of them, they are probably dead. Madeleine has been missing now for more than 10 years beyond this legal milestone. Number 4, Madeleine died earlier in the day. This is what Detective Amaral seems to subscribe to, this theory, and it's this theory that we're going to investigate and possibly fine-tune. So, where do we start? I do think it's interesting that the bogus Tanner sighting seems to draw us in, seems to ask us to think that something happened at around 9:15 p.m. Now, raise your hand if you were drawn into that and you are still thinking about the events around 9:15, 9:30, 9:45. In other words, while the group were out at dinner. If you were, well, then they've succeeded in drawing your attention into what I think is a bit of a dead end. Now, in my opinion, we do need to pay attention to what happened at around 10 p.m., the alleged sighting at that time, but also, and perhaps even more important, the events of that Thursday afternoon. What happened before they went to dinner? What happened after lunch? In the JonBenet Ramsey case, the timeline fragments. Guess when? Well, when the Ramseys visit the Steins. From that moment on, it's unclear. In the McCann case, the timeline starts to jumble between 4 p.m. and around 6 p.m. when David Payne apparently randomly decides to visit Kate McCann. And according to the statements, there's not an agreement on how long he was visiting Kate McCann. You may recall from Kate's book that she had just gone for a jog. She doesn't say when, but if you add all the times together, it looks like about 4:30 p.m. while Jerry was with the children. If Kate arrived back at the apartment after a 30 or 45-minute run, which is commonly the length of time for most runners, Kate would be back at the apartment somewhere after 5 p.m. And if she'd taken a shower, she probably would have been ready by around about 5:30 p.m. And that is exactly the time that Amaral talks about in Chapter 10, a chapter titled Rethinking the Facts, May 3rd, 2007, 5:30 p.m., terrace of the Paraiso restaurant, 600 meters from the resort complex. He writes, apart from the McCanns and Diane Webster, Fiona Payne's mother, the whole group of friends are having something to eat, right? This is at, I think, 5:30 p.m., so why would they need to have dinner? Why would they be hungry 3 hours later? Anyway, the children are running and playing on the terrace. Others of Madeleine's age are coming and going between the restaurant and the beach. Everything is peaceful on this late afternoon. And what's missing from this picture? Well, Madeleine. Already at 5:30, Madeleine's not with this group. At 6:13 p.m., the men leave the table and go on foot to the resort. A quarter of an hour later, so now 6:30 p.m., it's the turn of the woman and children to go back. A few minutes go by. David Payne catches up with Madeleine's father, who is playing tennis, and asks him where Kate is. Jerry replies that she has gone back to the apartment with Madeleine and the twins. David goes there immediately. Now, what Amaral has done is he's stitched a lot of the statements together to come up with that particular version of events, which is now going to question. He's going to rethink. He's going to re-examine it. Something does seem strange in terms of the timeline at around about this point, 6:30. By then, the entire group have left the Paraiso restaurant, which is the restaurant on the beach. This in itself is arguably odd as well, because the sun only sets 2 hours later. So why does everyone leave when only a few are playing tennis? There are only 2 tennis courts. The sun's only going to set 2 hours later. So they have at least another hour to enjoy themselves on the beach, but instead they leave early. All of them seem to appear to leave early. Going back to Amaral's book, The Truth of the Lie, he writes, what did he go there to do? How long did he stay there? How were the children? Did he see them? Did he play with them? From that moment on, the witness statements differ. According to Gerald, he stayed in the apartment for 30 minutes. According to Kate, no more than 30 seconds. This difference of opinion is important enough to be taken into consideration. It's not the only one. In any event, Amaral concludes the paragraph writing, quote, let's note that at 7 p.m., the last person to see Maddie, apart from her parents, is this member of the Tapa 7. Then he talks about this whole other version of that late afternoon given by this member's wife, that according to her, Jerry was not playing tennis, but he was actually in the apartment the whole time with Kate and the children. I do think it's interesting that according to Fiona Payne's version of events, Jerry wasn't playing tennis, but was at the apartment with Kate and the children. And this is where the football narrative is possibly relevant, who knows. although Amaral's timeline seems to take us, some way in a particular direction, he doesn't, certainly to my mind, nail it down. It's possible a witness many don't even know about provides a vital clue into this particular period of the day on May 3rd, right? Late afternoon. Her surname is Tranmer, easy to confuse with Tanner, and she was the niece of Mrs. Fenn. Her name was Carol Tranmer, and Mrs. Fenn lived directly above the McCanns, and Carol Tranmer was visiting Mrs. Fenn at the time on the afternoon of May 3rd. Now, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to fine-tune Amaral's timeline. And so I don't want to focus on who, I want to focus on when. When do things seem a bit strange? So the question is, when did Carol Tranmer, who was sitting with her husband on the balcony on the afternoon of May 3rd, notice something strange? According to her, she sat on that balcony for 3 hours, sort of lounging in the sun, just chatting and enjoying the afternoon. Tranmer said that she noticed a 30-something man leaving the McCann's apartment and that's in her words, a stealthy way, taking great care for the gate not to make a noise when he opened and closed it. This was so strange, she made a remark about it at the time to her husband. She also reached out to the authorities because she thought it was important. So when she's asked by law enforcement, okay, you told me that he was doing this stealthily. What do you mean by that? Carol Tranmer answers, stealth. Someone who would draw my attention, the normal way of entering and exiting a gate, one opens the gate and just leaves. But he did this as though he wanted to make the minimum amount of noise, that is stealthily, and as if he did not want anyone to know that he was coming or going. The officer responds, yes. And she said, this was very, very unusual, and it was this that stayed in my memory. The unfortunate thing about this statement, and I have to say, the officer conducting this interview, I think, did it really badly. I think he could have done a much better job in the way he conducted it. And of course, it was taken in April 2008. And Carol Tranmer acknowledges that her memory is quite fuzzy almost a year later, right? Almost a full year after the incident. When Tranmer was asked to guess the time, that's such an important aspect. Well, she said it could have been anywhere between 3:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. And so she says, this all happened on Thursday. The officer says, yes. She says, we left at around 6:30, meaning we left the apartment complex at 6:30. It was already dusk because at that time of the year it gets dark quickly in Portugal. We drove to our hotel and arrived at 8 or 8:30. And although that part of the timeline is a little strange in and of itself, Tranmer makes a valuable observation. She says that they left at dusk, which she thought was 6:30. In reality, dusk is closer to 8:30 p.m. I should know, I was there. I photographed the exact moment that the sun goes down beneath the Ocean Club complex. Tranmer's account is that they spent around 3 hours at the apartment, sitting on the balcony in the sun. If we go back in time from dusk, that's more likely 5:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. This, in theory, assuming our extrapolations here are accurate, would include the time Kate returned from her jog and the time someone entered the apartment while Kate was there. She goes on to say, if it was in the afternoon, somewhere 3:30 and 5:30, because the sun was going down and it was getting colder. Now, that's another thing she's telling us. If we look at historical weather data for early May in Praia da Luz, temperature inflections occur repeatedly from 6 p.m. onwards. And that's also the time that a lot of the Tapa 7 leave that Paraiso restaurant on the beach. But Tranmer also mentions the sun going down, and that is that it was getting darker. So 7 p.m. is seeming like an even likelier time when this gate closing actually occurred. If we try to reconcile all of this admittedly messy data with the knowledge that A, cadaver odor takes around 2 hours to form, and B, the signal found in the flower bed below the balcony, which I think was described as a medium alert, it was nevertheless strong enough to sustain itself despite being outdoors and in the rain, exposed to the weather for 3 months before the cadaver dog found it. Well, it suggests that the body may have lain there without being seen for some time, for at least 1 to 2 hours. If it was discovered close to the time Tranmer saw someone entering and leaving the apartment furtively, in her words, and we take this time to be, let's say, 8 p.m., 30 minutes before sunset, then Madeleine may have died at approximately 6 p.m. That's being hypothesized here, and you are welcome to challenge it. It's simply a hypothesis. I'm not going to take it further than that. In the next analysis, we'll look at what Amaral thinks actually happened to Madeleine. I must say I disagree with that, but we'll look at what is possible and compare that to what is perhaps more probable, certainly in terms of that particular theory. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.